Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Colleagues, good evening. Tonight, in my comments regarding this bill, I particularly want to focus on the impact of rural and regional Australia. Today in this place I introduced a private member's bill which spoke of the importance of the need to positive discrimination in favour, just as my colleague has just expressed, for rural and regional Australia, and that one size does not fit all. So I want to take my opportunity tonight to further that argument. And I'm wanting to take the opportunity to ask the government to seriously consider a regional strategy that actually takes holistic thinking and looks at the national good and at how we as a nation can educate ourselves, have the workforce that we need and have the economic growth that we need that is a direct result of good education. And I just can't enforce enough in tonight's debate, as I know many of my colleagues have, the fundamental importance of education. And tonight we're talking about post-school higher education as one of the pillars of a developed nation. And what I'm so sad to see in the discussion that we've had from the government is the lack of the vision, the lack of a strategic approach of how education is actually going to come together to be the driving force that we need. And in the 4 years that I've been in this parliament, 5 actually, education has been one of the higher education and government approach to it has been one of the significant disappointments of my time here. The lack of vision, the lack of a way forward, and often the lack of partnership in our ability to actually move forward. So I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about my electorate of Indi and why this topic is just so important and why I think that the changes are going to have a negative impact on my community. And I quote from the Higher Education Information Navigation, an exploration of parent information needs in the Hume region, presented by Regional Development Australia and RDV. And it says, page 6, it's of concern, therefore, that the Hume region has some of the lowest educational outcomes in Victoria. For example, the region shows lower retention rates for years 7 to 12 than the average non-metropolitan regions. The region also has an estimated 22% of young people leaving school through years 10 to 12, and that's in comparison to Melbourne, where only 15% of this cohort leave school. The percentage of people aged between 25 and 34 in the Hume region with a bachelor degree or higher was 17.35%. Let me just read that again. The percentage of people aged between 25 and 35 in the Hume region with a bachelor degree or higher was 17.35%, compared with a Victorian average of 30.4%. And hence the region has just over half the Victorian average of people with a university degree. Like, they're shocking statistics. And I live in a really well-connected part of Australia. We're getting better internet, we've got trains that sometimes work, we've got roads that work. Yet we've got those appalling statistics for young people accessing tertiary education. So what happens? The young people leave. It's our biggest export. And the consequences for a nation that doesn't pay attention to this are really serious. Have obviously bigger cities, but not having a young cohort of educated, well-trained, not having universities in our regional centres to drive economic growth is just the most short-sighted policy we could possibly have. So I'm beseeching the advisers tonight, I'm beseeching the minister to actually seriously do something about this, to do seriously something about a regional— if you can't solve the problems for the nation, and I get it's complicated, surely for regional Australia we can begin work on a strategy. And we can actually do something for the regions where I live in, and where those appalling statistics are in existence. So, in not wanting to be just totally negative, my office has been working with the Parliamentary Budget Office to come up with some solutions of how there might be some positive things that we could do to make it easier and better for the regions. And I've sent it across to the Minister's office, but some of the costings, if we changed the help repayment free period and we amended it for rural regions. So it was some of the work the Parliamentary Budget Office did. And they came back with, and I've got all the details here, but in summary, an expected fiscal balance impact of -9.7 million over a 2017 and 18 budget forward estimate if we just change the payment-free period. And this is such a small impact compared with the savings that the governments expect of over $3.8 billion. So I say to the colleagues in the House, at what cost do we keep going with this track of making education, higher education, harder and harder to get? And we as a nation are not accepting the responsibility that I believe we have to give, not only to give people equity, but to actually provide education provides the driving force for our regions, and it will enable the whole of regional Australia to take its place in the nation in the years ahead. And by this legislation, by not paying attention to the impact on the regions, we're really working against the ability of our regions to do that. And I say to my colleagues here tonight, you can make some great friends with listening to what I've got to say, because it's not just me who thinks this. And clearly I'm in the backbench, I'm an independent member of parliament. But the Rural Universities Network, put out a press release, strongly endorses Cathy McGowan's notion of regional universities before the House of Representatives and the need for a national regional higher education strategy. So that's the run universities. La Trobe University, John Drewer, supporting strong local campuses because we need it for regional development. But the bit I really want to bring to the House tonight is a letter from what I thought was a most surprising ally, and please forgive me for making that assumption, but the Group of 8. So I have a letter today from the Group of 8, and I'd like to read it into Hansard as part of my speech. Dear Ms McGowan, and it's signed by Vicky Thompson, Chief Executive of the Group of 8, which is our universities in our cities. Dear Ms McGowan, as Chief Executive of Australia's leading research universities, the Group of 8, I'm writing to you to offer my support for your private members' bill and the National Regional Higher Education Strategy. There often appears to be the view that the GO8's teaching and research is confirmed to the major cities. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. The GO8 remains committed to assuring not only equitable access for students to high-quality education, but also long-term sustainability and economic growth for the region, as should the government, let me say. And then they go on to detail the GO8's contribution to regional Australia. More than 25,000 regional and remote students study at GO8 universities each year. So that's our great export. 1 in 8 rural and regional students study at a GO8 university. 50% of agriculture and environmental students in Australia study at a GO8 university. 60% of veterinary students in Australia are trained by GO8 universities. They tell me they invest in outreach to regional communities, which of course they do, and it's important. But the point is, imagine the situation we've got today. Here I am, backbench, independent, strong advocate for other regions, and I've got the GO8 on side, we've got the rural universities on side, and beseeching the government to please do something to make sure that the unintended consequences, and I say that kindly, are not going to be felt in the long term on the nation, because at this particular time we failed to pay attention to the impact of this legislation tonight before the House on rural Australia. So I don't know how to say it other than the consequences are going to be enormous for us. And we can't say we didn't know, because the debates in this House tonight are so strongly put forward by my colleague from Herbert, talking about the impact on rural and regional communities. So, in closing, I really want to say to the Minister, to the Prime Minister and to the advisers in the House tonight, to my colleagues on the government side, to the members of the National Party in particular, stand up for your principles and your values, stand up for rural and regional Australia. And to members of Parliament from the Liberal Party who represent our regional electorates, stand up for rural and regional Australia. Just don't let this go through tonight. It's poor law. It's poor law, and it will have incredibly bad consequences for us. So, and what's just so distressing and so disappointing is that this sense that one size fits everybody, when clearly with university education we need to differentiate. We need to make the case that those in the regions need special treatment. And government has done it in some areas. There's a limited loading there, but it doesn't go nearly far enough to actually address the imbalance of those statistics that I put up earlier. 17% of my young people going on to higher education. Like, and it's an appalling figure. It's something we really should be ashamed about. And certainly it's something that, that I absolutely want to see changed. And part of the reason why I became a Member of Parliament was to do something very specifically about accessing higher education in the regions. So, in closing, I say to the Minister, it's time for a vision. And if you can't have a vision for the whole of Australia, could you please have a vision for regional Australia? Could you please really consider the call from the GO8s, the call from the run universities, and come and work together on a strategy that over a period of time will deliver equality? Sure, that's important, but then it will deliver us a trained workforce. We're doing all this international work to bring foreigners to the country because we can't, in the regions, get enough of our own labour force, and yet we do nothing positively to make sure that our young people are trained in the jobs that we've got. And we've got so many jobs that we could have people working in the country. So it just seems to me quite ludicrous that we're not addressing the labour shortage in this most obvious way by training people in the regions, which seems to me so sensible. And the third area that is just to me so obvious, I'm on a committee at the moment with many government members and opposition people looking at regional development and decentralisation. And it's a very productive committee to be on. We're working together to say, well, how do we grow the regions? How do we use decentralisation as a tool of government? And universities have to be one of the most cost-effective ways of government money getting investment, I think, cost-effective investment for growing our regions. So much money goes from the Commonwealth coffers into the regions, and it's such a good opportunity for us with such a small increase or appreciation of the impact. We could have just a most amazing multiplier effect. So it's a call from the heart to the Minister, to the Prime Minister, to my colleagues on the government side. Really, if you can't actually support us on the move here, could you please pay attention to a regional strategy and work with the parties so that we can then make sure that in the longer term, when we look back on this particular parliament, we can say that was the year the government got the regions. The government got the role of education in supporting the regions and helping the regions be the answer that they can be to so many of the problems that this nation is facing. So I bring my comments to a close with a real call-out to the advisers in the box tonight and to the Minister to reconsider your decisions around a regional strategy for rural and regional Australia. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.